Welcome to First Thoughts, a series about me trying something new where I play a demo, encounter a new game, or maybe just watch a video and go over some of the things I'm thinking as I do. Today, we're talking about Death Must Die, a game that really cuts to the quick and drops you right into the fray by placing you here with little to no fanfare. There's a very quick flash of the controls, and after that it's off to kill skeletons. They walk at you slowly and don't do very much, so you're able to level up pretty darn easily. And this is where the game reveals what it is. A combination of Hades and Vampire Survivors. Now, gameplay-wise, it does seem very similar to Vampire Survivors, though enemies are a little bit more complex, so maybe it's a little more accurate to describe it as a Vampire Survivors game that's a little Hades-flavored. In this case, I'm F of Fates, Crom, the God of War, which is Discount Ares, and then Summer, who's definitely the hottest one I've seen so far. Her power's fire if you couldn't guess. With how many games have an overly long tutorial, it's genuinely refreshing to have a game that drops you right into the action. Plus, since it's a roguelike, no real harm if you die, that's just part of the game. Speaking of, after killing a few enemies, progressing through a few more waves, that's exactly what I do. I die, because I got a little bit too greedy and wasn't managing my health very well. Alright, let's go again. And so I went through and died again. Alright, this game might not be so easy. Well, it appears to be a new character, who has some very interesting and rather pixelated jiggling going on. It's generally impressive with the simple animations that they've managed to include a physics engine. This is also where you find out the first character's motivations. He's just out for a walk, and if some skeletons interrupt you on your walk, of course you're gonna kill them. That's understandable. After a short introduction, I got right into trying the new character, and she is so fun. Being able to shoot fireballs from range means you can play much more safely. The skeleton archers, or summoners, who were quite annoying before because they ran away, are absolutely no threat now. I can chew through their minions or blast them from a distance. It was also about now that I learned something else about the game. When you level up, not only do you get to speak to a god or goddess, but you knock enemies away, meaning if you're in a tricky situation, so long as you get the EXP gems, you'll be good at least for a little bit. I also felt like the second character did a lot more damage than the first, which is a pretty standard trade-off in games. You can either do a lot of AoE or have high single target damage. Though with various god powers, I'm sure there are ways to augment that later. And it's about at this point, as I was doing a few more runs, that I started to pay a little more attention to the game's mechanics. So the fates seem to just be basic upgrades that make your character better. Crom, on the other hand, has effects like Rupture, think Bleed, and also Whirling Blades, which is why I kind of consider him to be Discount Ares. Summer, on the other hand, is everything fire. Want to leave a trail of fire when you walk? She's got it. Want to set enemies on fire when you hit them? She's got it. Want enemies to leave fire when they die? She's got it. Summer's kind of my easy favorite, since setting things on fire is fun, and it's a great way to add area damage to my favorite single target character. I also encountered a fourth goddess, the Daughter of Death, who's apparently on my side. Not sure if this is a play for power in the underworld, or if I've just got an unusual friend. Either way, I'm going to start cursing enemies, since that seems pretty effective. And as it turns out, cursing, especially with ravens, did end up being one of my favorite powers. This was also the point where I started to pay attention to items. Because as you defeat enemies, they drop items, and these items are essentially your meta progression. You can carry them from run to run, sell them at the shop in town, and probably upgrade them later, though that's pure speculation on my part. Which means this is somewhat like Vampire Survivors, somewhat like Hades, and also kind of its own thing, which is great. After a couple runs, I also realized that the waves of enemies I was fighting weren't actually bosses. See, at several points in the game, I'd been surrounded by walls of black fire, and a group of enemies attacked me, which I thought was a boss encounter. After all, they were somewhat challenging, and it seemed like a good way to introduce enemies. You have to have enough damage, otherwise you'll get overwhelmed. No, as it turns out, this is actually the boss fight. Really dangerous archers who run away and try to shoot you from a distance. But by this point, I had a few runs under my belt, and I picked up two essential pieces of information. The first is, you move slightly faster if you're not attacking, but you can just hold down your attack button to constantly slash your sword or fire out projectiles. And second of all, more interestingly, in most cases, enemy projectiles are also destructible, meaning if an enemy is trying to shoot you from a distance, the best way to counter it is by just attacking. Death Must Die truly does follow the phrase, defense is my offense, and if you kill enemies before they kill you, then clearly your defenses are fine. So after a harrowing game of tag, I defeated the boss and brought my run to an end. Yep, at least for now, that's where it ends. Though I would assume in the future there's more bosses and possibly some sort of progression system where you start later on. With that said, what are my thoughts about Death Must Die as a whole? Well, first up, I've played a lot of Vampire Survivor-like games, to the point where when I look at them, often I say, yeah, but what does this bring to the table? And with Death Must Die, first off, I got a lot of Hades flavor, which I appreciated. But the Hades flavor didn't quite extend as far as I would like, because one of the best parts of Hades is the dialogue and character interactions, where in Hades they feel like very flawed, but realistic people, and their flaws are often the most interesting part. Whereas in Death Must Die, the characters felt very quippy, like they were trying to be cool and a little edgy, and it just wasn't resonating with me. Now, it could be that this is just an example of taking a limited selection of a larger example of dialogue, or it could be that the game really isn't going to be for me in that regard. Though, if I put the story aside, the gameplay is quite solid. While the initial skeletons are very easy, later enemies are more complex, requiring you to dodge, and they have decent telegraphs. I also found that your upgrades definitely matter. On the one hand, you could rupture a bunch of enemies, which gives you very far reach, but not too much single target damage. Or you could go into some firepower, quite literally, and do massive single target damage, but maybe be a little lacking on AoE. Ultimately, you have to balance your clear speed and your single target, which I found, generally speaking, you want to lean towards the clear speed, because you can always make up for single target, at least for the first boss, by simply preventing enemies from acting by destroying their projectiles, and some careful positioning with your dodge. Because the game does have a dash, and it does give you iframes, although they are quite limited. This means if you're not positioning carefully, you're going to get hit and die. Speaking of, as you go around the map, if you get hit, occasionally you will be able to activate a shrine that heals you. Some other shrine effects seem to be summoning enemies and giving you power-ups or experience. So this adds a nice layer of depth and gives you a reason to explore moving away from your precious EXP crystals. Even though in the demo you only have two abilities, attack and dash, a very simple setup, I like the way customization changes how the skills feel to play. Adding projectiles to Fireball and making it pierce is very different from a sword attack that covers a wide area and inflicts burn stacks, but requires you to get close to your enemies. Or maybe you could go with a hyper-mobile dodge build that has a short cooldown, but requires you to spam it since it's a shorter distance covered. With only 4 gods, I'm sure things would fall into a predictable pattern of builds fairly quickly. But I'm assuming for the full release there's going to be more than 4, so there'll be a lot of room to min-max for the most effective setup, or simply play the way you like. I also like the way the game rewards aggression, by being able to destroy enemy projectiles or get into the face of a lot of things then dodge through their attacks. You really aren't encouraged to run away from things, you're encouraged to fight them. And this means that when you're at low health, taking a risk can absolutely pay off. Or like in my first run, it can backfire because you don't really know what you're doing and that's just not a good idea. But either way, I like gameplay that encourages me to not just kite in circles, though you can do that a fair bit if you want to, but instead get into enemies' faces, know how much damage I'm doing, and annihilate them. One part that was a little bit confusing was items. There seemed to be some sort of stat system to get rarer stuff, with Adept and Master and Legendary. I didn't really get that, so I'm going to assume that the best items in the game are obtained by reaching level 5 in Nonsense Magic and applying 4 Wobbledywoos. Most of the other stats were very simple. Health, EXP gain, Shard pickup, which I'm assuming is EXP. All that stuff makes perfect sense. But overall, the demo for Death Must Die was pretty fun, and I'm looking forward to what the game brings to the future. I like how the game innovates on the Vampire Survivors formula by adding a little shot of Hades. So there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to be picking it up at some point in the future. I also look forward to seeing different characters, because I don't think there's just going to be 2, and right now the playstyles are very distinct, they feel fun and refreshing, plus it's easy to swap between them since your gear is actually shared. You get some upgrades, some of which are custom to the character you're playing, so with a well-rounded cast of characters and gods, I do think the game could have a bright future. With that said, I'm curious, what do you think of Hades-flavored Vampire Survivors, aka Death Must Die? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked this video, be sure to get subscribed for more first thoughts, video essays, gaming news, and much, much more. With that said, if you're looking for something else to watch, maybe check out my review of Monster Train, a deck builder roguelike that I ended up playing way too much of. Or if you're looking for another survivor-like game, and you've already played a ton of Vampire Survivors, check out my indie wrap-up where I talked about Potato among others. It's about what Vampire Survivors would be if you were playing as a potato. And of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. With that said, thanks for watching, keep an eye out for more first thoughts as I'm going to be changing up the style just a little bit next time, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.